Say it with me now. AO. AO. AOA. I just want to see if y'all was with me. It's the end of the conference. Now, I was coming in last night, and I was rolling in. I was real tired. I was up at the University of Denver helping them with a little bit of work, and I arrived here at the hotel, and I saw a group. It had to be 11:30. They had shut down one venue, and then en masse was en route to another one. I said, this is my type of crowd. These are my type of people. I start walking around asking people, I said, well, how was the conference? They said the conference was magnificent. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. I said, well, where you from? Well, I'm from here. I'm from there. Folks were speaking so fast, they were slurring their words a little bit. I said, where you from? They said, I'm from STSU. I said, San Antonio State University. What are you doing here? No, I'm at STSU. I was like, what? SDSU. Oh, I get it now. I'm from San Diego State University. They said, where are you from? I said, well, actually, I am here from Atlanta. I'm not currently at a university, but I'm friends to many, and I'm here to be the speaker tomorrow. And they said to me, oh, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm the final major speaker. And they said, oh, you're the excellence guy. I said, yes, I'll take that all day. I am the excellence guy. So I am here to be with you today. I am the excellence guy. I am Damon Williams. I am activating in social media always. I'm looking around the room. I see a handful of millennials. I see a whole bunch of Gen Xers like myself. There's some boomers in the room too. I don't see any Centennials and Gen Zs, but that's who we serve, so try to figure it out. I am at DAWPhD, and I am hashtagging. I am always hashtagging strategic diversity leadership, and I am hashtagging inclusive excellence. For any of you so inclined to get after it in the social media world and to continue the conversation there. Now, one of the things that I will say for those of you who are going to activate in the social landscape, and again, at DAWPhD and Strategic Diversity Leadership and Inclusive Excellence, you have an opportunity to get something that you've wanted for your libraries, something for your reading enjoyment, something that coming off the holiday season, I know your season was incomplete. If you get after it in social in a way that's particularly compelling, if you do it for the gram in a way that elicits some likes, if you put it on LinkedIn or Facebook and it looks particularly thoughtful and insightful, you can all be the recipient of a signed copy of Strategic Diversity Leadership or the Chief Diversity Officer. I'm really glad to be here. I haven't had a chance to be with this audience for a while, and I've never had a chance to speak at this particular conference. You know, my career, my life, as I'm sure many of you, has really been spent engaging as a leader, as a scholar, as a change agent around some critical questions. And you may not know what your critical questions are, but if you start thinking about your career, you start thinking about what are the problems that you've been trying to solve in your day-to-day work. If you start thinking about what are the ways that you're making maybe a difference, not at work, but even in your community or with your family, there's some critical issues. These aren't my familial questions, but these are the burning questions that have powered my career. One of them is, so what is this diversity idea in the 21st century, and why is it so important today in what we refer to not as an agrarian economy, not an industrial economy, not even a knowledge economy, but what we're starting to refer to as a economy of connection. Now, stay with me now. I want to ask a couple questions. And if you are someone who can respond affirmatively, give me your hand. How many in the room have ever used an Uber or a Lyft? Connection economy. How many of you in the room have ever ordered something on Amazon.com? Connection economy. How many of you have ever stayed in an Airbnb? Connection economy. Our economy, more and more, is defined by this idea of connection. And one of the things that's interesting as we think about who we serve and student pathways to success in the 21st century as leaders and decision makers, as educators maybe in a different way, as contributors to the educational mission in critical ways, how are we understanding and engaging this connection economy? So I've been thinking about these issues in terms of diversity, thinking about it in terms of leadership, thinking about it in terms of workforce, thinking about it in terms of change. Also, too, how do we engage in a broad and inclusive conversation of diversity race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, disability, diversity of background, diversity of thought, diversity of region, internationalization, all the various spectra of sexuality. How do we engage in that broad conversation and still not lose sight of the incomplete work of racial and ethnic equity, and still not lose sight of the need for us to have women leading at all levels of our organizations, and still not lose sight of the fact that if we don't find a way to get males, white males, in conversations as full contributors and not feeling silent on the margins as if they can't say anything, we won't be able to get anything done. How do we do that? Burning questions that have powered my work as a scholar, as a leader, as an educator. What does it mean not just to do stuff, but to do things strategically? My PhD's in organizational behavior and management. People that tend to be trained in the manner in which I am tend to work on other types of issues. Long ago, I said I have great respect for critical race theory. I have profound respect for the critical praxis of other social-based and analytic frameworks. But I came to understand that those frameworks were powerful and clearly important for understanding issues, but they didn't give me the tools that were necessary to do anything about them. I was frustrated by the fact that I would see so many diversity plans, master diversity and inclusion plans. Now we got diversity, inclusion, and belonging plans. Some folks going with them throwback old world equity plans, all types of plans, but still we're not getting there. I was looking at these issues and I was frustrated at these questions. How do we embrace the realities of this next generation? The generation that's on our campuses now, traditional age, the generation that's in our high schools, our middle schools, our elementary schools, coming in pathways, the centennials. Some refer to them as Gen Z, born 1997 through to today. I was the chief education officer for the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. How many of you heard of Boys and Girls Clubs of America, if I can see you? And give some love for those organizations every day. Give some love to them now, who each and every day create powerful pathways to student success. If we were to do a study and look at the 400,000 plus students in your institutions, many of them underrepresented, many of them first generation, many of them coming from economically vulnerable, overly indexed, racialized contexts, many of them come from them clubs. And we ought to be very thankful for the work that they do every day. How do we prepare ourselves for who they are? The fact that they're woke and conscious, many of them, particularly students of color. The fact that each and every one of them is empowered in new and powerful ways through social media. To be connected, to have voice. See, our young people spend as many as 9 hours a day engaging digital media. And when you engage this digital media, several things are true. One, you never have to be alone, because you're always connected. Two, you always have a voice in the world. So how am I going to show up on your campus and be told I'm just a student? Three, you have an ability to pursue your passions always through connection. I'm interested in makeup. I'm interested in basketball. I'm interested in racialized hate. I'm interested in immigration policy. I'm interested in Me Too. Engaging. And one of the things that happens now on our campuses is what's the first thing that occurs when there's a diversity and inclusion flashpoint? Y'all know what I'm talking about. When folks are having an interaction, the interaction goes bad. What's the first thing that happens? Pull out that phone, right? Because this generation of young people, see, the millennials we began to refer to in a particular way. The boomers we refer to in a particular way. This generation, they're not digital natives. These young people today, they're digital intuitives. Everything about them is about engaging in the digital. And so for those of you at this conference who are able to shape space in your institutional environments, who are thinking about the educational experience, the customer experience of your students that are coming on campus, you're thinking about it in some ways that are digital in nature. And then the question that keeps me up real late at night. Why is there so much talk of change, but oftentimes so few results? So much talk of change, but so few results. We minstrel the change process oftentimes. We don't truly leverage the best of what we know on how to go from A to Z. We oftentimes stay in silos in our conversations. We oftentimes don't skew towards those who are vulnerable. We don't skew towards innovation and new possibilities. One of the things that I see in the 21st century is there's an incredible amount of awareness around these issues. I was asked a question not too terribly long ago, and I was at Boys and Girls Clubs of America. I'd stepped away from higher education for 4 years. I managed one of the largest portfolios in the not-for-profit world, was working with about 400 corporate partners, working with local leaders each and every day, doing really, really amazing work. I stepped away from that and came back into this new reality. And I made the decision that I didn't want to go back to an institution and be an executive right now. I wanted to see if I could find a way to drive impact in new and creative ways without restraint, without convention, without politics, and still take care of my family. That was a hell of a conversation when I talked to my wife. She was like, you want to do what? And you know, understanding comes to us in waves. It comes to us in waves. People ask me all the time, how do you find your passion? Students, leaders, young professionals, professionals changing careers, non-traditional students. How do you find passion? How did you get on passion? People think that passion falls from the rooftop and it just hits them and now you have it. Passion is clarified by action. Purpose is clarified by doing. All you have to do is get a direction and start walking with a plan. The direction and the goal doesn't change once you know what it is, but the plan of how you get there, you adapt, right? Why is there so much talk of change but so few results? And so we've been moving around the country in so many different ways, and there's probably hasn't been an audience that I've been in front of in a conference setting in a while that I feel like is more poised to make a difference than you are. You're such a powerful community of leaders, a group of leaders who often maybe are not asked to be in the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation in the ways that you could be. Those are just auxiliary folks over there running the bookstore. Those are just the folks over there that are doing the research-sponsored program stuff. Oh, those are the folks over there that are just, they're just taking care of dining services and managing the relationship with Sodexo or managing whatever the case may be. But the reality is the roles that you play in AOA, I believe, are foundational in so many ways. You drive and you direct revenue. You control bookstores, unions, and other public spaces, which establish the cultural, informal context through which belonging happens or exclusion happens, through which unconscious bias can manifest or not. You are the leaders who are critically poised in that way to influence the geospatial dynamics of our institutional cultures and environments. You empower the voice of students, working with associated student governments, working in spaces and contexts that empower student and empower student voice in so many different ways. I'll never forget, I was at an institution in the Northeast, and I was talking to a group of student leaders, underrepresented minority student leaders, at an institution where they were small and tiny in number. And they told me that they couldn't get the funding that they needed from student government because their groups was too small. And there was a framework and a way that they went about allocating dollars, and that was all based upon how many students were at the institution. But when we flipped the conversation and asked what was the contributing weight of the contribution of these small student organizations to the cultural lived experience of these underrepresented, often excluded and marginalized students, their impact was gigantic and through the roof because their work was the work of innovation that transformed the lived experience of these young people. And I'm sitting there and I'm talking to them, and most of them were young women, because one of the things we're seeing across the board often is the systematic removal of males of color. Latino males most likely to drop out of school before high school. Black males most likely to be at the bottom of the barrel across every single dimension. Native American males most likely to be addicted to legal or illegal drugs prior to high school. Seeing the systematic elimination of males of color in many ways, let alone we double down and move out of a paradigm of model minority and start talking about Southeast Asian, Hmong, Vietnamese, Laotian, and start to broaden the conversation in incredibly important ways. You hold the relationships in some instances with donors and alumni, some of our most powerful influencers. We on the inside in the Chief Diversity Officer unit, we on the inside in certain different areas, we may not be able to get the chancellor to pay attention. But when donor so-and-so calls, well, I had a conversation with Susan, and she was just telling me about the problem that you're experiencing around food insecurity on campus, and that tugged at the heartstrings. Me and Molly like to get involved. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Folks always talking about getting involved. We raised about $500 million at the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. I loved it when they say we want to get involved. I came to understand what that meant. That was like rich white folk language, but we're going to make a contribution. I want to get involved. When I say I want to get involved, I'm talking about coming down reading. I don't have no big checks to write, right? Hold those relationships. Have the ability to build and establish strategic partnerships. I'll never forget one of the most powerful conversations that I had around these issues of auxiliary and driving revenue and possibility and new possibilities was with someone who controlled all vending on campus. Anybody here in the room control vending? Couple folks. I got one for you. I got a strategy for you. It's a takeaway. It's a takeaway. Came over to us and they said, we were so moved by this event we just went to. And I think that you all will be benefited from something that we can do. They said, we control vending on campus. We're getting ready to take a price increase. Y'all know about a price increase. We're getting ready to take a price increase. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to make set up an account that would be a private account that you as the Chief Diversity Officer unit will be able to use a percent of the revenue that we generated for creative, innovative programming that you felt like needed to be done to make a difference. We're going to do that. Outside the box. Came to us with the conversation. First time I started thinking about these issues in a different type of way. Strategic partnerships on campus, off campus, cutting deals, seeing where in your span of leadership and control you can make a difference. Because I believe you are all essential to defining the social, cultural, and economic realities of your institutions. Now, one of my favorite books is authored by Dyer, Greger, and Christensen, The Innovator's DNA. Anybody ever heard of that book, The Innovator's DNA? Ooh, that's the second book you should get right after Strategic Diversity Leadership. You should have that one on your leadership library as well. Everybody's talking about innovation, 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 innovation. We got to innovate. We got to get more efficient. We got to do more with less. We got to shift the paradigm. How can technology help us to do X, right? All these different things, talking about innovation, innovation. And one of the things is when you're an executive at the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, you're constantly interacting with our board, the number one board in the nonprofit world. So you're interacting with the president, CEO of Sun Microsystems. You're interacting with the president, CEO of Microsoft. You're interacting with the uber most engaged and celebrated executives in the world all the time, pitching strategy. Never forget the time that Jack Stahl said to me, Damon, that's some really good thinking, but that's not a strategy. I knew it wasn't a strategy, but oftentimes we create frameworks and want to call them strategic plans in the non-for-profit world and in the academy. In this particular instance, everybody was around was like, don't put all those details in, Damon, about timelines and milestones and who's going to own and what it costs. Just put the framing. Jack was like, no. But I digress. This idea of moving from awareness to action to innovation. Because I'm certain that if I were to poll your campuses across the mighty CSU, we would see tons of things that are happening on campus. There's lots of action happening. There's lots of awareness happening. And when I had that conversation with that person in the media, when I stepped away from what I was doing at Boys and Girls Clubs of America and stepped back into this new world, they said, what's different? I said, what's different is when I stepped away, nobody talking about unconscious and implicit bias. No one was talking about racial microaggressions and other types of aggressive dynamics. They said, what's different? I said, everybody's talking about it now. I said, but you know what they're saying? The shit's still happening. I said, we're talking about it at a high level. We're doing more than ever before. But I look around, I don't see a lot of innovation. I don't see a lot of things that in the technology sector they refer to as poking the box. See, when they're working on a new program and you're trying to figure out how to make, you just try stuff. You throw code at it. You poke the box and see what comes back. You poke the box and see what comes back. We don't have a culture of innovation in nearly anything on our campuses except in our research laboratories. in our scholarly endeavor. So it's in our DNA, but it's just way over there. And so Dyer, Greger, and Christensen wrote this book, and they talked about this idea of innovation. How do you innovate? What are the key dimensions that make an innovator an innovator? And what I found is that the best research oftentimes is some of the most simple research. So they went out and they talked to innovators. They talked to innovators in higher ed. They talked to innovators in the corporate sector. They talked about innovators in the non-for-profit world, K through 12, big box retail, technology. They talked to innovators across all sectors. They said they talked to innovators in government. I don't believe them because I don't think there's any innovation there, but I will take them at their word for it. They talked to innovators across the board. And they asked them, well, what makes an innovator an innovator? So they asked this question. And what they learned was as follows. They said, number one, and as I put these ideas out, I ask you to ask yourself if you embody this quality of an innovator. Innovators are always questioning their world. Why not? What if? How might we? Why can't we seem to create a higher level of graduation rate for students? Why is it that our students of color seem to leave our institution at a higher rate and level? Why is it that we still are talking about food insecurity, but we don't seem to be coming up with any creative solutions around it? Why is it that we look across our leadership landscape and there's a whole bunch of women that are answering phones and doing this, but they're not at levels of leadership where they're succeeding into the level of line leadership authority? Why is it? Why is it? They're asking questions. Questions. So if you're not questioning your world and your reality, if you're not questioning issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, chances are you're not innovating. Number two, innovators know that solutions don't happen in silos. Innovators are looking for solutions wherever they can find them. If they see the solution over here, they search and reapply. If they see someone role modeling a type of leadership, they search and reapply. Innovators are looking for solutions wherever they can find them and bringing them to where they live and activating them daily. Innovators know that innovation happens through the engagement with other innovators. When Steve Jobs was fired from Apple, if you read his book or listen to his story, he's a flawed, crooked person, just like we all are, but there's lessons to be learned there. He said, if I would have left the valley, Silicon Valley, at that time, I would have probably never innovated ever again. Because there's something about the culture of being around others who are similarly striving for something different, striving for something that pokes the box, striving to go in a different direction. See, that's why this conference right here is lit. AOA. Because you're coming together. And it's only when we come together with like-minded folk who are trying to get something done that we really start to renew our energy, find new creative possibility, and open up the potential for innovation on our campuses. How many times do you open the door and say, you know, I'm going to see about a partnership with this organization over here around this issue? Like that individual who controlled vending when they came to our office and said, I've got an idea. Can we partner? Engaging across boundaries, engaging other innovators. But innovators also don't just talk about it. Innovators have a bias towards action, and they do. They start, they launch, they get after it. I am so sick and tired of these diversity planning committees that spend 18 months working on a plan that y'all know good and damn well you're not going to do nothing with. Why? Because we developed a framework, not a plan. Why? Because there was no one from business, finance, administrative service, or foundation or development to talk about how we want to resource it. You get it? And the resource plan is the prayer. Prayer. Right? Hope. Now, I do believe in hope. And me as a leader, I want my brand and my leadership to be about two things. I want it to be about hope and empowerment, but I also want it to be about strategic guidance and support. Hope and guidance and support. See, but innovators start, they experiment, they do. They don't wait, they get after it. And when innovators figure out what works, they take ideas to scale and they go big. So once they've experimented with something, once they've developed a working model, once they've built a prototype, once they've tried it and they've proved the concept and tweak it, then they want to go big. When I look across our institutions, I see this little bitty unconscious bias workshop over there. I see this little thing we're doing with the student leaders over here. I don't see things that are scaling. You innovate when you scale. You scale by taking great complexity and making it more simplistic. So you say it's this, this, and this, creating what we refer to in the technology world as the minimal viable product. You get the minimal thing of training, the minimal thing of learning, and then you want everybody to know how to do it. Everybody to know how to do it. That's what we're working on now in my center. We're working on these types of products because I am sick and tired of developing and doing things and being a part of things that's only touching a small fraction of an institution. One of the institutions I was partnered with, they were on the front page of the New York Times. And that gives you a lot of interest in coming up with something new and creative and innovative. When your president, CEO has to be on ABC News talking about some diversity crisis that happened on campus, you really want to do something then. And this particular institution we partnered, and what was amazing is the chancellor said, get something done that's going to touch all of our first-year students, and I want it to happen. I want it to be substantive. And I'm not talking about no little online, hour and 10-minute little online thing. I'm talking about something substantive. 3 months we worked, and we came up with an integrated first-year experience program that we launched that same fall, taking 6,000 students through a 1-credit-hour leadership program that was academically anchored in nature, that had a common book program associated with it, that has principles of intergroup dialogue embedded in it across the whole first-year experience. Scaling. 85% of all department chairs going through what it meant to lead in a 21st century diversity and inclusion context. 700 instructional leaders going through a 4-hour workshop on inclusive classroom pedagogies and how to not aggress in different ways. Scaling. That's the key to innovation. Now, what I found is that as I looked at this framework, there was oftentimes one critical ingredient that wasn't included in this model, right? One more ingredient. And I think this is a great model. I think it holds up incredibly well. But when I took the model and overlaid it with the idea of engaging these issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I found that everything, hey there, how you doing? I found that every one of the elements of the model held up for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it was missing something. Anybody got any idea what it's missing? Got to be questioning. Got to be finding solutions. Got to be partnering and experimenting and going big once you know what works. But what's missing? Results. What else is missing? What else is missing? Say again? Sustainability. Something that's not going to be a one-shot deal. It's going to be going on forever. Great ideas. But an accountability. I love accountability. I did a webinar January 31st of last year. We had 1,800 people register and show up for the webinar. We touched 11,000 people. The title of the webinar was Diversity Plans Can't Breathe Without Air. Accountability, incentives, infrastructure, and resources. Diversity plans can't breathe without air. Accountability. You pull 99% of these plans, no conversation of accountability, no conversation of incentives, no conversation of infrastructure, no conversation of resources. So how is it going to be successful? I am so tired of these high-ranking chief diversity officers getting appointed, wonderful leaders themselves. They have no money. They have no policy authority. They have no staff. They are glorified diversity and inclusion brand ambassadors. And that is at no challenge or critique to them. The condemnation comes on the leadership and the institution, which creates a context in which a structural solution is inappropriately designed vertically or laterally to truly get something done. But I go back to this 6th characteristic. See, because what I found is this. That irrespective of whether you are a student leader who says, my voice will be heard, you are a community leader who says, I am going to stand up in a Black Lives Matter type of context and be heard. You are an individual that is sitting on a search committee and says these questions that are being asked of this woman about her family and when she wants to have children and what's going on are inappropriate. Whether you are an individual who elevates your voice in any type of way, publicly or privately. Because at times when we elevate our voice quietly is when we show the most of this characteristic. Whether we're talking about Dr. King, whether we're talking about Mahatma Gandhi, whether we're talking about student leaders, whether we're talking about leaders in this room who have made a difference that skews towards those who are vulnerable and need possibility, what we're talking about is this idea of leading with courage. See, the rate limiting factor of doing something different is being courageous. What are you going to do with your budget differently to do this? When you're sitting down and cutting a deal on this, how are you going to see new possibilities? When you elevate something that is unpalatable and maybe people aren't going to like it because there's financial constraint and pressures on the institution and we have to produce this revenue to get this thing done, you're standing and cutting against the grain. See, innovation is always about cutting against the grain. It very rarely is about going with the crowd. Innovation. The rate limiting factor of innovation is courage. The courage to be humble because you don't know something, you need to learn something. The courage to build new relationships. You know, oftentimes I'll ask folks, I say, how many of you have actually had lunch or dinner with someone of a different racial, ethnic background than yourself? How many of you have children who socialize and engage in informal settings that is diverse in multitudinous ways? How many of you have actually gone to dinner or lunch with someone who's of a transgender background and doesn't use traditional gendered pronouns but has a different way of being and living in the world? I'll never forget the first time that I started thinking about gender and sexuality and fluidity of movement and multiple different ways that intersection happens. Of course, I was in California. I was in California. I was a good Midwesterner. I didn't know nothing. I came out here to California. Y'all turned me out. I was out here doing this talk on inclusion and diversity, and this had to be 14 years ago. I was telling Steve, I was like, my first major talk I gave on these issues was at San Jose State. It was at one of your institutions years ago when they first started thinking about this idea of inclusive excellence. I said that talk had to be horrible. I know it was horrible. But I'll never forget, I was at one of the institutions, I think it was UC Santa Cruz, beautiful institution, and this young person came up to me, and this had to be over 11 years ago, and this young person said, quote, Dr. Williams, I love what you're saying about understanding your power and privilege and giving some of that up and doing things in different ways that allow for empowerment of different and vulnerable communities. I love all that. He said, I'm going to ask you a question personally. He said, how many times have you mentored someone not who is just of a different race, ethnicity, but someone who doesn't use those categories at all. Someone who refers to himself, his language, not mine, as the freak. He was beautifully racial and ethnically ambiguous, as only y'all can be in California. He had the eyeshadow and all kinds of stuff going on. And he challenged me. He challenged me. And so one of the things I believe deeply is about the courage to build new relationships, the courage to coach and mentor and sponsor folks that are different than you. Those of you that are in leadership roles, you want to know the pathway to helping somebody who's underrepresented, whether it's along the dimension of gender or race or whatever, to crack through, is to be mentored. And not just to be mentored, but to be coached. And not just to be coached, but to be sponsored. See, when you have a sponsor, somebody picks up the phone and they make a call for you to help you move into an opportunity. They elevate you in ways that allow for you to get visibility. When we talk about leadership and leadership succession, we're talking about PI, performance, image, and exposure. You can be the most amazing performer at what you do, but if your image is not fitting what is going to be required in the leadership role and you don't have exposure to decision makers, you're not going to rise through the ranks. People ask me all the time, why can't we seem to? It's because of these dynamics and these issues. The courage to challenge our privilege and our bias, constantly asking questions of ourselves, the courage to approach our work as servants and working with students in powerful ways, all of these different dynamics are part of this work. Now, I will oftentimes come to various different institutions, and I am greeted with the following. We are struggling with campus diversity. We have a diversity plan, but is it enough? How can we turn the corner? Where do we start? How can we make a difference? How can we truly get something done? Can you tell us what to do? Can you help? Save us, Obi-Wan Williams. You're our only hope. And the thing that I say in response to that is that there's no inclusive excellence pill that makes our institutions more diverse. There's no inclusive excellence pill that makes our leadership get it. There's nothing that we can do that's simplistic that moves us from A to Z. That it is a difficult journey. And it's a journey that's about more than head count. It's about more than just bodies and representation. It's about how we lead. It's about how we make culturally relevant decisions. When we're sitting down with folks and we're planning meals. When we're sitting down and we're thinking about the student experience and movement. And we're thinking about this idea of bringing folks together across difference. We want it to be the blue and the red curve, but often, and the reality is, it's the yellow and the green curve. I always say that this work is about managing change, but it's also about this idea of the diffusion of innovation. How many of you have seen this model before? This idea of diffusing innovation. See, because when you create something that's innovative and new, and you introduce it, I'm asked all the time, should we create something and mandate that every faculty and staff member go to this training and do it? I say absolutely not. What you should create is something that's magnificent and wonderful and strongly encourage and make sure it's really visible who did and didn't do it. And the divisional leader need to be held accountable to what was produced. But I never told you you had to go, right? But what's most important is what you build. See, because I believe when you introduce innovative concepts, innovative programs, innovative initiatives into the space, into an environment, there's going to be a small group, a 2.5% group that are innovators. They're just going to have it and they're going to go with you. We call them the choir. There's another group of early adopters. They'll come with you for the most part. There's an early majority group that has nothing against it, but they're not going to go forward with it unless they have a reason to. There's a late majority group who's probably like, I'm too busy, I'm not concerned with that, but they're not against it strongly, but somebody has to go to them and get them to get involved, and it has to be the right person. Then you got those laggards. Laggards are like, nah, I'm not doing that ever. And then you got another group of resistors that are just way out there, and they are fighting against you. Those are the ones that call fire. Those are the ones that call the National Academy of Scholars. Those are the ones who are going to call conservative organizations. Those are the ones who are going to try to get Milo come to your campus so you can spend $150,000 securing the event and create a sensational burning issue that goes viral. Right? That's that group of resistors. Now let me explain this to you in a different way. How many in the room are iPhone users? Lots of folks iPhone users. So the iPhone, 10 is out? 10? So when the iPhone 10 was just beginning to get introduced to market, the innovators sourced the phone from China and then got it and downloaded the software and started using it before it ever hit the marketplace. Those were the innovators. The early adopters, soon as Best Buy and Apple said it was available, they immediately signed up online. They waited out in the rain. They got their phone on the first day it was available. The early majority, that group is where most of us are. We sitting back waiting for our contract to be up. When my contract's up, I'm going to go get that phone, right? The late majority, they're sitting back and they're saying, nah, my contract's up, but I'm not going to get that phone because I don't think my data's going to transfer. I'm worried about my music and my pictures coming over. They got this thing called the cloud, and I don't trust it, right? Those individuals sit back and wait until their operating system stops working and the phone just keeps crashing, and then they finally see it's all cracked up and broken up. I got to go get a new phone, right? Then you've got the laggards. The laggards are sitting back, and the laggards are like, I'm not really into all that technology, and so they've got phones that flip. They're not even smart. They don't even have data plans. They go and buy the minutes, and it's only to be used for disasters. Like, if the house is burning down, call me. Other than that, don't call me, right? And then you got the resistors. The resistors, they're like my granny. My granny got a cell phone. Her phone rings, and you got to ring. It's a little thing that does that, right? The thing with all of us is we're in the room, and I believe the good majority of you are somewhere between innovators and early adopters of this message that I'm talking about and others are. But if you won't be responsible for helping those ideas to spread to others in the innovation curve, then we never can really move the needle at our institutions going forward. Now, I did say that I consider myself to be looked at and looked towards as a Jedi. And I consider myself to be strong and wise in the ways of the Force, but I also talked about the critical importance of mentorship, coaching, and sponsorship. And so in preparation for today's talk, I reached out to one of my mentors, and I asked, what he thought about the message I was to give with you today. And it was the wisdom of Master Yoda. And he said, strongest is the culture with this one. Colleges and universities are most resistant to change. Nebulous and multiple goals they have. Decentralized environments are prevalent. Shared governance, it confounds the greatest of leaders. Faculty and staff, they live long in the life of the campus. Conflicting ideas regarding diversity and excellence persist. Loosely coupled systems make the future difficult to see. Ritualistic and symbolic are their planning efforts, not focused on real change and deep transformation. Strong you must be in your resolve. Proceed forward with caution. Thank you.